Christopher, you did not support the Gulf War in '91, and yet no one has been more vocal, it seems to me, in terms of being supportive of a war against Iraq than you have.
No, and here would be why I disagree with myself, and also, if I may, with just a line of your introduction, Charlie, where you said a war on Iraq, or even a war with, I forget quite what you said.
I think I said a war against Iraq is what I said.
A war against, yes. Well, actually, I'd criticize that even more.
Why would you criticize it? Let
me mention a friend of mine, Dr. Bahram Salih, who's now the elected Prime Minister of one part of Iraqi Kurdistan, who says the term he prefers is a war for Iraq. I would say at least we could say a war over Iraq or a war about Iraq.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a quarrel with Saddam Hussein's regime. And there are many reasons, I think, why that
which is in control in Iraq today, so therefore...
Yes, but let us look, I'm replying directly in a way to David here, to David Reif. Let's look at the bit of Iraq that is controlled by the Kurdish and Turkoman population, which exempt from Saddam's control and protected by the no-fly zones. Here you have 21 newspapers, several political parties, internet cafes, free travel, free trade. This is, by the way, in the most mountainous and tribal and in some ways most backward part of the country. And over the last 10 or 11 years, they've created something like a democratic civil society. That, I think, is pretty impressive. That's not, therefore, to be utopian to say no question that Iraq can do better than it's doing or be done by better by its friends and allies. I consider myself in this matter to be an ally of the Iraqi and Kurdish opposition. And I think that's being true to the same principles with which one was opposed to previous interventions there.
No, is this somehow you looked at a conclusion and you backed up to find reasons that you could make to arrive at that conclusion?
Well, I would feel very bad about myself if that's how I sounded. I'd rather just stand by what I just said. There's an irony here, if I can draw attention to one, though. A lot of people, I think in America as well as in the region, believe the United States is all-powerful. It's a common myth, as you know, throughout the Middle East. The United States is behind everything, and I'm afraid the idea of omnipotence has infected some of our policy intellectuals, too, and some of the people in the administration. They think what we say goes. The fact is that options are very limited at the moment in Iraq. Another disagreement with what David and what Michael Waltz has said. The collapse, the implosion of the Saddam Hussein regime is coming anyway. It's coming like Christmas. We're going very soon to be faced, whatever we do, with all the ghastly consequences of a post-Saddam Iraq, which will include, indeed, Sunni-Shia rivalry, other regional rivalries, the possible intervention of neighboring countries, revenge killing, innumerable unpleasant possibilities. But they do include also the possibility I just mentioned, that of a more democratic and pluralist Iraq, as exemplified in the areas that are not run by Saddam Hussein. So knowing that we're going to have to decide on a post-Saddam Iraq anyway, what are the alternatives? Are we in fact already at war or not? I would say there's merely a truce at the moment in what's been a very long quarrel with the Saddam Hussein regime. It would be far better to have a public and democratic argument about how best to condition the post-Saddam situation. And in my view, the best way to do that is to say we are firmly on the side of his foes and his enemies, and we want for Iraq what they want. And that supplies a standard by which the administration can be judged if for any reason it doesn't live up to it.
All right.
So it means the critique can go on even if the intervention is, in the military sense, successful.
So,
what
Christopher.
don't you like about the new Afghanistan?
Well,
what don't you like about
the new Afghanistan, Christopher? It's very simple. The United States has blocked almost every effort at serious development, at serious peacekeeping. It's the U.S. command that prevented the spreading out of the UN-commanded ISAF forces. Surely one has some right in this matter, when you talk about a democratic Iraq, to look at the record of the United States in post-conflict situations.
By all means, but you'd be making the case. But then you would surely, therefore, be making the case, in fact you just were, for more intervention or better intervention rather than less. Come on, listen to your own argument.
No.
The fact is the population of Afghanistan has gone up by 1.5 million of its citizens who want to come back. Don't forget the 4 million Iraqis forced to live outside their country who also have the right of return, and the condition of at least 50% of the population, those of the feminine gender, is obviously improved. It's no longer the headquarters of a lethal conspiracy. That's not bad for a year's going.
I don't disagree with Christopher that
That all sounds like hard-headed and realistic and practical, but in fact it's extraordinarily utopian. I mean, do you not agree with me that the implosion of the Saddam Hussein regime is coming? That you will either have to face a collapsed and imploded Iraq with or without a policy very soon. Now, to say that there will be innumerable difficulties here, as there are in Afghanistan, seems to me to be no more than trite.
United Nations forces coming there to liberate them.
I'm saying that in the only place where opinion can be tested without fear or without coercion, it's practically unanimous. I wouldn't presume to speak for the citizens of Baghdad, and I actually don't think probably David Reef should do so either. But we know that there's a very large Shia slum belt population around Baghdad, where Saddam City, it's called rather insultingly, where such opinion as has been tested seems very hostile to the regime. As I said earlier, there are 4 million Iraqis forced to live outside their country. We have a very good idea of what they think. I believe they have the right of return, by the way. There's a very, very strong indication that a regime, furthermore, that insists on 100% turnout and 100% vote isn't very sure of its popular base.
Okay, but there is an obvious point that you well know, which is that on the one hand, you can wish a regime would be overthrown. Another is to wish that somebody would come and bomb your homeland in order to overthrow the regime. Those are two very different points.
No, but these people say they wish that a regime change would come, and they believe it can only be conditioned from outside. Now, that wouldn't give the United States the right on its own, of course. You have to prove at least 3 or 4 other things, I believe. One, that Iraq is a threat to its neighbors, again, which it certainly is, and would be if it wasn't forcibly disarmed, even more so. Third, and I wish there was more emphasis on this, the evidence that Saddam Hussein should be tried for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and under the Genocide Convention need only be taken off the shelf. We have all the files necessary for that arraignment. I think it's to the disgrace of the U.S. government that it doesn't make use of them and say that that's another warrant that it's executing. That's unfortunately because it doesn't agree with the International War Crimes Tribunal, and indeed until today appointed for its own investigative commission someone who would also be hunted by it. I'm sorry, I can't speak for the administration. And then there's the question, which Dr. Coe seemed to be underestimated, of the connection between Saddam Hussein and international gangsterism. Last weekend, Saddam Hussein made a speech calling for a common front of jihad with the al-Qaeda forces in Kuwait against the British, the Americans, and the Jews.
Well,
that's the day he hands over the documents.
We're still waiting.
He's the man who organized the Abu Nidal network. Yes, but you won't have to wait all that long, and all the pieces of evidence that we do have are very suggestive of at least a non-aggression
Let me get Harold in
between the Iraqi Ba'ath Party and the al-Qaeda network.
Michael made a very important
point. That really is being callous about Iraqi lives.
Well,
that really is being callous about them, because that would mean that these changes and upheavals would take place with Saddam's helicopters and Republican Guard free to help decide the matter.
Well,
the argument for an intervention is that that faction should be taken out.
Okay, Christopher.
I mean, not okay.
But I must have expressed myself very poorly, David.
Well, then express yourself better.
I must have expressed myself very, very poorly earlier, I mean to say, when I said, don't let's exaggerate, as the fanatics in the Middle East and the extreme conservative dreamers sometimes are liable to do here, as if the United States can just do as it wishes and invent places to go fight in, and, or as you put it, monsters to destroy.
Charlie, people talk
or dreams to dream. The fact is,
yeah.
this confrontation has somewhat been forced upon us by Mr. Saddam Hussein. Wouldn't you at least consent to that?
David?
No, because it's not clear to me that this inspection regime won't work. And above all, it's not clear to me that containment, even if he's cheating, isn't working. I mean, again...
So you think he's a rational actor?
I think he is... It is irrational to make war a first resort, which is what I think the administration is doing.
By no means. Look, everyone knows the administration is badly split on this. There's a big faction of the conservative movement that's very strongly opposed to doing this, and for very good reasons, that they on the whole like the Middle East status quo the way it is. They like Saudi Arabia the way it is. They don't want the risk of regime change.
Okay.
But
Christopher, let me, before Harold jumps in, is part of your argument for the war and the necessity of regime change also because you would like to see, as some will argue, a democratic state in the Middle East which can be used as a force to spread democracy among other regimes you might not like?
I certainly think, and I've continued to take the example of my own solidarity with, the example of the Iraqi National Congress and particularly the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. But we can't know that their victory is predetermined. Of course, we can't say, by the way, if you take my line, Iraq will become democratic. We can say it has a much better chance to do so, and its own citizens will have a say. But the crucial question, it seems to me, is that Saddam Hussein has refused every possibility, every chance of saving us from this confrontation. And is no longer, if he ever was, a rational or credible or deterrable person. He's quite clearly a wigged-out, sadistic megalomaniac.
But not the only one.
You have only to look at the speech. Yeah. Look at the speech he made on the Sunday. His poor, intimidated, crushed officials hand over this pathetic set of documents to the UN inspectors. The leader then makes a speech saying what we want is a common front of jihad with the jihadists against the British, the Jews, and the Americans. This is a suicidal despot.
What is the situation in Iraq? I mean, where is it the point of difference with you and Christopher about the urgency of
the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention could undoubtedly be invoked against Saddam Hussein and should have been invoked much earlier than it was.
It may be the case that we are already intervening in Iraq to prevent mass murder with the no-fly zones, the protection of Kurdish autonomy. But that means that mass murder is not occurring.
Such is already indeed the case, and unfortunately for Professor Coe, it couldn't be done multilaterally because not enough countries would agree that it was important enough. That's the sad fact of the matter. I mean, the no-fly zones do not have a UN warrant. The Iraqis indeed are within their rights to fire at those planes. I wish, of course, I'm sure Professor Coe wishes the same, that more countries had agreed to take part in enforcing the no-fly zone, but they didn't. So the question was someone going to do it or not? Or was there going to be another Rwanda on our watch in northern Iraq and southern Iraq too?
Well,
I don't think these are questions that can be very easily evaded.
Do you think the inspections can work, Christopher? And if so, where does that take you?
Well, some of us are prisoners of a certain amount of knowledge about this. Kofi Annan wanted the inspections, but he wanted them to be, or agreed to them, he wanted them to be run by Rolf Ekéus, a rather brilliant Swedish diplomat who had a proven record of success with inspections after 1991. The regime, Professor Walter said he was willing to go to war over, or for. His appointment was vetoed by the envoys of France and Russia, who are indebted and or bribed by Saddam Hussein, on the grounds that he had a record of proven success. They wanted instead a man, Hans Blix, with a record of proven failure. These are the facts. Mr. Blix certified Iraq twice in the 80s and 90s. He certified North Korea, if it comes to that. He's put in by Saddam Hussein's clientele. This platonic talk about let inspections work seems to me to be so much piffle. They're not designed to work. If you're sincere about inspections, you have to be the government of Iraq in order to certify what you've got. So much must be clear. No one else can know except the government. So a real call for inspections, a call that really says we want to find out, is the equivalent of a call for regime change.
First, yeah. I think that.
How did I know you were going to say that?
Well, I saw the contempt on your face.
No, I'm just sorry. It was becoming
of the idea, not of
Harold. I don't think. I'm not here to speak for the administration, and anyway, they certainly wouldn't invite me to be their advocate. But I don't think that there is a hysterical triumphalist.
But I think what Christopher is saying is that this is the moment where it's a regime change or nothing. Where I think many people would say that with the war on terrorism and other priorities, our central concern is eliminating a nuclear or weapons of mass destruction threat, and that makes.
Well, I don't see why these things have to oppose each other. If I was to say that I rested my entire case on the Genocide Convention and the execution of a warrant against Saddam Hussein for crimes against humanity and war crimes, you wouldn't say to me, well, that's all very well, but shouldn't we be fighting the war on terrorism also? I mean, that would be making two good ideas a prisoner of each other, to the accomplishment of neither. Don't make the best the enemy of the good, in other words.
But
there are at least four very good reasons why, at least four very persuasive reasons why Saddam Hussein's regime ought to be removed, and we'd all be better off, including the Iraqi people, if it were. One can't always mention all four of them every time, but it's irritating, I think, to try and put them into a needless opposition or antagonism to each other.
Christopher, I have to end it there.
That's why Karl Marx called for the firing of General McClellan and the hiring of General Grant. He thought that these good causes might need a bit of muscle behind them. It's true. Look it up. He was Lincoln's best promoter in Europe at a time when the Europeans didn't support Mr. Lincoln. They supported the Confederacy instead.
Christopher, thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
Harold, thank you very much. Thank you, man. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.